Good evening and welcome. You are listening to Mindleapic, a quiet place for calm stories and gentle journeys through history. A place where the past moves slowly, where small details matter, and where everyday life from long ago can help your mind relax and rest. Before we begin tonight's peaceful journey, you might like to take a moment to gently like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps Mindleapic continue sharing calm stories like this one. And if you feel comfortable, you can also leave a comment telling us which city or country you are listening from tonight. It is always wonderful to see how many quiet corners of the world gather here at bedtime. Now the day is ending. The lights in your room may already be dim. Perhaps the blankets are warm and comfortable. Maybe there is a soft sound somewhere nearby, a fan, a quiet breeze, or the distant hush of the night. Let your shoulders relax. Let the day slowly drift away. There is nowhere you need to go, and nothing you need to do. For a little while, we will simply travel back in time together, to a city built upon water, a city of narrow canals, quiet footsteps on stone bridges, and gentle waves touching old wooden boats. Tonight, we will visit Venice many centuries ago, and we will spend our time with a man whose work moves as slowly and patiently as the water itself, a gondola builder. His days are calm, his tools are simple, his work follows rhythms that have not changed for generations. So settle in, breathe slowly, and let us begin. Long before the sun rises above the rooftops of Venice, the city is very quiet. The canals rest under a pale gray sky. The water barely moves. Wooden poles rise from the water like silent markers, guiding boats that are still tied gently to the docks. The narrow streets between the buildings are empty. Even the pigeons have not yet begun their morning flutter. But in a small workshop beside a quiet canal, a single lantern glows softly behind wooden shutters. Inside this workshop, a man named Marco is already awake. Marco is not rich, and he is not famous, but his work is known throughout the neighborhood. He is a builder of gondolas, and in Venice, gondolas are everywhere. They glide through the canals. They carry people to markets, churches, homes, and celebrations. Their long, black shapes move quietly through the city like shadows across the water. But before a gondola can glide through Venice, someone must build it. That work belongs to craftsmen like Marco. Marco's workshop is called a squero. A squero is a small boatyard where gondolas are built by hand, piece by piece, using methods that have been passed down for many generations. Marco's squero sits beside a narrow canal not far from the busy center of Venice. But at this early hour, the place feels peaceful. The air smells faintly of wood, water, and salt, carried in from the nearby lagoon. Marco steps slowly across the wooden floor of the workshop. His movements are quiet and familiar. He has followed this same morning routine for many years. First, he places a small kettle above a low charcoal stove. The charcoal glows softly, and soon the water begins to warm. While he waits, Marco opens the shutters. Morning light, pale and gentle, begins to spill into the workshop. Outside, the canal reflects the sky in soft shades of silver. A single small boat drifts slowly past, guided by a fisherman who begins his day early, just like Marco. Marco nods quietly to the man as he passes. The fisherman raises his hand in greeting. In Venice, many people wake before sunrise. The city lives by the rhythm of the water and the work of its people. Soon, the kettle begins to whisper. Marco pours the hot water into a simple cup and prepares a small drink of coffee. It is not strong coffee like the kind some people drink today. It is lighter, softer, and meant simply to warm the body as the day begins. He takes a slow sip. The warmth spreads through him, and as he drinks, Marco looks across the workshop toward the shape resting quietly near the water, a gondola frame. It is not finished yet, not even close, but the curved skeleton of the boat is already beginning to show its graceful shape. Gondolas are not simple boats. They are carefully designed, with curves and angles that help them move smoothly through Venice's narrow canals. Each gondola must be built slowly, patiently. A single gondola may take many months to complete. Marco sets down his cup and walks toward the unfinished frame. His fingers run gently along the wood. Smooth, strong. This piece of wood is oak, chosen for its strength. Another piece nearby is larch, a wood that resists water very well. And over there, stacked carefully against the wall, are boards of cherry wood and walnut. A gondola is made from many different kinds of wood, each chosen for a specific reason. The old builders say a proper gondola contains 8 different types of wood. Marco learned these traditions from his father, and his father learned them from his own father before him. The knowledge moves slowly from one generation to the next, just like the calm waters of the canals. Marco picks up a small plane tool. The metal blade catches the early morning light. With slow, steady movements, he begins smoothing the edge of a long wooden plank. The sound is soft. Shh, shh, shh. Thin curls of wood fall gently to the floor. The workshop fills with the pleasant scent of fresh wood. Outside, the city is slowly beginning to wake. Footsteps echo faintly on distant bridges. A church bell rings somewhere far away. 1, 2, 3 quiet chimes. Marco continues his work. Shh, shh, shh. The movements are steady, unhurried. In a place like Venice, patience is important. The water itself teaches patience. Boats drift slowly. Tides rise and fall gently. And a gondola builder learns to move with the same calm rhythm. Marco pauses for a moment and steps outside the workshop. The canal is brighter now. Soft, golden light touches the upper windows of nearby buildings. Laundry hangs between 2 houses across the water, moving slightly in the morning breeze. A gondolier rows quietly past. His long oar dips into the water with slow, practiced movements. The gondola glides smoothly along the canal. Marco watches it for a moment. Even after all these years, he still feels a quiet satisfaction when he sees a gondola moving gracefully through Venice, because somewhere, sometime, a craftsman like him built that boat. Perhaps in this very workshop. Marco returns inside. There is still much work to do today. Wood must be shaped. Pieces must be measured. Curves must be carefully adjusted. But there is no hurry. A gondola is not something that can be rushed. It must be built slowly, thoughtfully, one small step at a time. Marco picks up his tool again. Shh, shh, shh. Outside, the city of Venice continues to wake. But inside the quiet square, the slow and peaceful routine of a gondola builder has only just begun. Morning arrives slowly in Venice. The pale silver light of dawn has now softened into a warm, golden glow that touches the tops of the buildings and stretches gently across the canals. The quiet city begins to stir, but even now, the sounds remain calm and distant. Inside Marco's small square, the steady rhythm of his work continues. Shh, shh, shh. The wooden plane glides across the surface of the plank again and again, each pass removing only the thinnest curl of wood. The curls fall quietly to the floor, gathering in small pale spirals around Marco's boots. Marco pauses. He lifts the plank slightly and studies its shape. Gondolas are known for their long, elegant curves, but what many people do not realize is that a gondola is not perfectly symmetrical. It is built slightly uneven. One side is a little longer than the other. This small difference helps the gondola move straight through the water when a gondolier rows with only one oar. Marco runs his hand along the edge of the wood, feeling for evenness. For him, the shape of the boat is not only something to see, it is something to feel. His fingers are sensitive to the smallest changes in the surface, a tiny bump, a slight roughness, a curve that bends too quickly. All of these things can be discovered simply by running a careful hand along the wood. This is something Marco learned many years ago, when he was still a boy in his father's workshop. He remembers those mornings very clearly, the smell of wood dust, the quiet sound of tools, the soft creaking of boats tied along the canal. At first, his father did not allow him to use the sharp tools. Instead, Marco was given smaller tasks, sweeping the floor, carrying wood, holding pieces steady while his father worked. Sometimes Marco thought these jobs were boring, but his father would simply smile and say, "Every gondola begins with patience." Marco did not fully understand those words at the time, but now, many years later, he does, because every part of the work requires patience. Even something as simple as choosing the right piece of wood. Against one wall of the workshop stands a tall wooden rack filled with planks of many different sizes. Marco walks slowly toward it. His fingers brush across the surfaces of several boards. Each piece of wood has its own character. Some are pale and smooth, others show darker patterns that twist gently through the grain. Marco pulls out a long board of larchwood. Larch is very useful for parts of the gondola that will remain close to the water. It resists moisture well, which is important in a city surrounded by canals. He lifts the board carefully and carries it toward a wide wooden table. The table is covered with marks from many years of work, small cuts, faded lines where measurements were drawn, and darker spots where tools have rested countless times. Marco places the board, flat, and begins measuring its length with a simple wooden ruler. The ruler itself is old. Its edges are worn smooth from many years of use. He marks the wood lightly with a piece of charcoal, just a small line, then another. Each mark shows where the wood will be shaped and cut later. But even now, Marco does not rush. He studies the wood carefully before making the first cut. Sometimes the grain of the wood tells a quiet story, a knot hidden beneath the surface, a curve in the fibers. These natural patterns can change the way the wood bends and moves. Marco turns the board slightly, watching how the light falls across it. Yes, this piece will work well. He nods quietly to himself. Outside the workshop, the canal is becoming busier now. A vegetable boat floats past slowly, its small deck filled with baskets of fresh produce from the islands of the lagoon, green lettuce, round onions, bundles of herbs. The boatman calls softly to people standing near the docks. Soon the markets will open. Farther away, another church bell begins to ring. Its sound drifts gently across the rooftops. The bells of Venice are never loud or sharp in the early morning. Instead, they seem to roll softly through the air, like slow waves across the water. Marco hears the bell but continues his work. He has heard these bells every morning of his life. They are part of the rhythm of the city, a quiet reminder that the day has begun. He picks up a long, thin saw and positions it along one of the charcoal lines. The saw moves slowly, back and forth, back and forth. The sound is calm and steady. Small grains of wood fall away as the blade moves deeper. Marco's movements remain patient and controlled. In a gondola workshop, there is no need for speed. If a piece is cut too quickly, the wood may split. If it splits, the board cannot be used. And if the board cannot be used, many hours of careful preparation are lost. So Marco breathes slowly and lets the saw do its work. Back and forth, back and forth. Outside, the sky above Venice has turned a soft shade of blue. Sunlight begins to sparkle across the water. Two children cross a nearby bridge on their way to help their parents at a shop. They pause for a moment and look down at the canal. One of them notices Marco's workshop. The door stands open now, and the shape of the unfinished gondola frame can be seen inside. The children whisper quietly to each other. To them, the long, curved skeleton of the boat looks almost like a sleeping animal resting beside the water. They watch for a moment, curious. Then they continue across the bridge and disappear into the winding streets. Inside the scarrow, Marco finishes the cut. The board separates cleanly into two pieces. He brushes the wood dust gently from the surface. For a moment, he simply stands there, looking at the growing collection of shaped pieces resting around the workshop. A gondola does not appear all at once. It grows slowly, first a few pieces, then more, week after week, month after month, until one day the full shape finally reveals itself. Marco lifts the newly cut piece of larch and carries it toward the gondola frame. He holds it carefully against the curved side of the boat, studying how the shape fits. Yes, with a little more smoothing, it will sit perfectly. Marco smiles slightly. Another small step forward. He sets the piece down and reaches again for his plane. Soon, the quiet scraping sound returns to the workshop. Shh, shh, shh. Outside, the canals of Venice continue their slow morning dance. Boats glide past. Water ripples softly against the wooden posts. And inside the peaceful squarrow, Marco continues the careful, patient craft that has shaped the boats of Venice for generations. The morning in Venice continues to unfold slowly. The sunlight now reaches deeper into the narrow canals, touching the water with small dancing reflections. The city is awake, but it is not loud. Venice rarely becomes truly noisy in the way large cities sometimes do. The water softens the sounds. Footsteps echo gently on stone walkways. Voices carry quietly across the canals, and from time to time, the slow splash of an oar dips into the water. Inside Marco's workshop, the air has warmed slightly as the sun rises higher. The lantern he lit earlier is no longer needed. Sunlight now streams through the open shutters and stretches across the wooden floor, where curls of wood still lie scattered like pale ribbons. Marco moves calmly around the gondola frame. He pauses beside a large, curved piece that forms part of the gondola's side. This piece is called the fianchi, the side panels that help give the gondola its elegant shape. Each side must curve in a very specific way. Not too steep, not too flat. A gondola's beauty is not only something that people see from the outside. It is something that also affects how the boat moves through the water. A well-built gondola glides quietly. It turns easily in narrow canals. It feels balanced beneath the gondolier's feet. Marco places both hands on the wooden frame and presses gently. He is testing the strength. The wood holds firm. That is good. But wood is alive in its own quiet way. It moves slightly with changes in air and moisture. A gondola builder must always pay attention to these small changes. Marco reaches for a small wooden mallet and taps gently on one of the joints. Tock, tock, tock. The sound is soft but clear. He listens carefully. The tone of the wood tells him something about how the pieces fit together. Too dull, and the joint may be loose. Too sharp, and the wood might be under too much pressure. But this sound is just right. Marco nods quietly. Across the canal, a woman opens the shutters of her window. She leans slightly out over the water, shaking a small cloth to remove dust. The cloth flutters briefly in the morning air before she folds it neatly. Nearby, another gondola passes. This one carries a man in fine clothing who appears to be on his way to work. In Venice, boats are the roads. Gondolas move through the city, the same way carriages move through streets in other places. Marco watches the gondola for a moment. The gondolier stands at the back of the boat, balancing easily as he rows with a long wooden oar. His movements are smooth and relaxed. The gondola responds quietly to each motion. Marco cannot help but admire the shape of the boat. Even after so many years building them, he still notices the small details. The gentle curve at the front, the long smooth sides, the slightly raised platform where the gondolier stands. But one feature of the gondola always catches the eye: the ferro. The ferro is the metal piece attached to the front of the gondola. It curves forward like a graceful blade and reflects the sunlight as the boat moves. Each ferro is carefully shaped. Its design carries small meanings connected to the city of Venice. The 6 small teeth along its edge represent the 6 districts of the city. The curved shape reflects the curve of the Grand Canal. Even small details in Venice often hold quiet stories. Marco steps back inside the workshop and returns to his workbench. Several tools rest neatly on the table. Each tool has its purpose. Each tool has its place. There are planes of different sizes, chisels with carefully sharpened edges, wooden clamps, small measuring strings. Marco picks up a narrow chisel and begins shaping a small groove in the larchboard he cut earlier. The groove must fit perfectly with another piece of wood that will connect beside it. Again, his movements are slow, careful. The chisel removes thin layers of wood. Tap, shave, tap, shave. The sound blends softly with the distant life of the city. From somewhere far away comes the faint call of a market vendor announcing fresh bread. Another boat glides past outside. The gentle rocking of the water nudges the small dock beside Marco's workshop. Wood creaks quietly. Time seems to move slowly here, and Marco does not mind. He has lived his whole life by this rhythm, by the slow shaping of wood, by the quiet patience of building, something that will one day float gracefully through the canals. Marco pauses again and stretches his back slightly. Working with wood requires many hours of standing, bending, and leaning. His shoulders feel the familiar weight of the work, but it is a comfortable feeling, a feeling that reminds him he is doing something meaningful. He walks to a small shelf near the back wall. On the shelf sits a simple wooden box. Inside the box are small items Marco keeps carefully: old measuring tools, a few carefully folded papers, and a smooth wooden handle from a tool that once belonged to his father. Marco lifts the handle for a moment. The wood has grown dark and polished from years of use. His father's hands once held this tool thousands of times. Now it rests quietly in the workshop. Marco smiles softly. He places the handle back in the box and closes the lid. Then he returns once again to the gondola frame. The unfinished boat waits patiently. Its curved wooden skeleton stretches almost the full length of the workshop now. It is beginning to look more like a real gondola with each passing week. Marco runs his hand gently along the side again. Smooth, strong, balanced. Yes, the boat is coming along well. He lifts the shaped larch piece and holds it against the frame once more. Soon it will be fastened into place. But for now, there is still a little more shaping to do. Marco reaches for his plane again, and soon the quiet sound returns. Shh, shh, shh. Outside, the canals of Venice continue their slow movement beneath the growing warmth of the sun. Boats drift past. Shadows shift along the walls. And inside the peaceful workshop beside the water, the gondola slowly continues its journey from simple wood toward a graceful boat that will one day glide silently through the ancient city. The sun now sits higher above the rooftops of Venice. Light fills the narrow canal beside Marco's workshop, and the water glows softly with gentle ripples of gold and blue. The morning has settled into a calm and steady rhythm, just as it does most days in this old city of bridges and quiet waterways. Inside the squero, Marco continues his careful work. The gondola frame rests beside the water, its long shape stretching across the workshop like a sleeping creature made of wood. Piece by piece, the boat slowly grows. Marco stands beside the frame, holding the shaped larchboard he worked on earlier in the morning. Now the time has come to place it. He lifts the board and fits it gently against the curved side of the gondola. The piece slides slowly into position, settling neatly against the frame. For a moment, Marco simply holds it there. He looks closely at the lines, the curves, the way the wood meets the other pieces. Then he nods quietly. Yes, the shape feels right. He reaches for 2 wooden clamps resting nearby. These clamps are simple tools, made from thick pieces of wood and threaded rods that tighten slowly when turned. Marco places the clamps carefully along the board, one near the top, another closer to the middle. He turns the handles slowly. The clamps tighten. The wood presses gently into place. Creak, just a small sound. Wood adjusting, wood settling. Marco listens carefully. Everything seems good, but gondola building is never rushed. Even when a piece appears perfect, Marco prefers to wait and observe for a few moments. Sometimes wood shifts slightly after being clamped. Sometimes a tiny adjustment is needed. So Marco steps back and studies the frame from a few steps away. He tilts his head slightly. Then he walks to the other side and looks again. From this angle, the gondola's long, graceful line becomes clearer. The curve begins low near the center of the boat, then rises gently toward the front. The shape almost resembles a quiet wave. Marco smiles softly. Many people who ride in gondolas never think about these small details. They see the boat as a simple thing, a place to sit and glide through the canals. But the builders know something different. They know that every curve, every board, every joint plays a part in the boat's quiet balance. Marco returns to the frame and taps the new board lightly with his mallet. Tuck, tuck. The sound echoes softly through the workshop. Outside, the canal is becoming a little busier now. A delivery boat passes by slowly, stacked with wooden crates. The boatman guides it carefully between the canal walls, steering with slow, practiced movements. In Venice, people grow used to moving across water the way others walk across streets. Boats pass each other politely. Rowers nod quietly to one another. Life flows along the canals. Across the canal from Marco's workshop, a small bakery has opened its door. Warm air drifts from inside, and with it comes the comforting smell of fresh bread. The scent moves across the water and slips gently through the open door of the squero. Marco notices it immediately. He breathes in slowly. Fresh bread. It reminds him that the morning is already moving toward midday. Soon he will take a short break, but not quite yet. There is still one small task he wants to finish. Marco walks to the tool bench again and selects a small brush made from stiff, natural fibers. He dips the brush into a small jar filled with oil. The oil is made from natural materials and helps protect the wood from moisture. Very gently, Marco brushes a thin layer along the edge of the newly placed board. The oil soaks slowly into the wood. It darkens the surface slightly and brings out the natural patterns hidden in the grain. Lines appear like soft rivers flowing through the wood. Marco watches quietly as the board absorbs the oil. Each type of wood behaves a little differently. Some drink the oil quickly, others take longer. But this larchboard seems content. It absorbs the oil slowly and evenly. Marco wipes the brush carefully and returns it to the jar. Then he steps outside the workshop for a moment. The canal air feels fresh. The water moves slowly against the wooden posts tied along the edge. Nearby, 2 gondolas are resting beside a small dock. gently rocking with the soft motion of the water. The gondoliers sit nearby, talking quietly while they wait for passengers. One of them notices Marco standing at the door of his workshop. He raises a hand in greeting. Marco returns the gesture with a small wave. In Venice, many people know the gondola builders. After all, every gondolier depends on their work. Without the builders, the gondolas would not exist. Marco leans lightly against the door frame and watches the canal. For a few peaceful moments, a small group of pigeons lands on the roof across the water. They shuffle softly across the tiles. One bird flutters down to the edge of the canal and takes a quick drink before flying away again. The city feels calm, unhurried, just the way Marco likes it. After a few moments, he steps back inside. The clamps still hold the board firmly in place. The wood has settled well. That is good. Marco reaches for a piece of cloth and wipes his hands slowly. Soon he will walk across the bridge to the bakery and buy a small loaf of bread for his midday meal. But first, he takes one more slow walk around the gondola frame. He checks each joint, each curve, each carefully placed piece of wood. The gondola is growing, not quickly, but steadily, and that is exactly how Marco prefers it. Slow work, careful work, work that follows the quiet rhythm of the water outside his door. Marco places his hand once more along the smooth curve of the gondola's side. The wood feels warm now in the sunlight. Soon, this boat will carry people through the winding canals of Venice. But for now, it remains here in the peaceful square, still growing, still waiting, still becoming. By the time Marco returns from the bakery, the sun has climbed higher over the rooftops of Venice. The narrow stone bridge beside his workshop is now warmed by sunlight, and the canal water has turned from pale silver to a deeper shade of blue-green. In his hand, Marco carries a small paper bundle. Inside is a simple loaf of bread, still slightly warm from the bakery oven. The smell of it drifts quietly through the air as he steps back into the scarrow. The workshop greets him with its familiar scents: wood shavings, fresh-cut timber, a hint of oil and varnish. These smells have filled Marco's mornings for many years. To him, they are as comforting as the sound of gentle waves against the canal walls. He places the loaf on a small wooden table near the window. For a moment, he simply stands there and listens. Outside, Venice continues its calm, daily rhythm. A gondola glides past the open door. The gondolier hums softly as he rows, the sound carrying across the water like a quiet song. Somewhere farther away, another church bell rings the late morning hour. Marco takes a seat on a small stool near the table. He tears a piece of the bread and eats slowly. The crust is crisp. The inside is soft. It is a simple meal, but Marco has never needed much more. The work of building gondolas is steady, patient work. It does not require rich food or heavy meals, only time and careful hands. As he eats, Marco looks across the workshop at the unfinished gondola. The boat seems to rest quietly beside the water, almost as if it is waiting for the next step, waiting for the next piece of wood to join its growing shape. Marco takes another small bite of bread and studies the frame. There is still much to do. The ribs of the gondola must be strengthened. The inner floorboards must be fitted, and later, the long, curved prow will need its careful shaping. But Marco does not think about all the steps at once. That would make the task feel too large. Instead, he thinks only about the next small step. That is the secret of the craft, one piece at a time, one quiet morning after another. When the bread is finished, Marco brushes the crumbs from the table and stands once again. The workshop feels peaceful. Sunlight fills the space now, shining across the wood and catching tiny, floating particles of dust that drift slowly through the air. Marco walks back to the gondola frame. The larchboard he clamped earlier has settled perfectly. That is good. He loosens the clamps slowly, turning the wooden handles until the pressure releases. Creak. The clamps open. Marco lifts them away and sets them aside. The board remains exactly where it should be. He runs his hand along the seam. Smooth, strong, secure. Another small step completed. Marco reaches for a chisel and begins shaping the inner edge where the next board will connect. Tap, shave, tap, shave. Each movement is gentle and controlled. The sound of the chisel blends softly with the distant life of the canal outside. Occasionally, a boat passes. Sometimes voices drift across the water. But inside the square, the rhythm remains calm. Time stretches quietly through the afternoon hours. Marco works steadily. He shapes small joints. He smooths rough edges. He adjusts curves that must be just right. Piece by piece, the gondola slowly becomes stronger. Its skeleton grows more complete with every careful movement. At one point, Marco pauses again and steps outside. The sunlight reflects brightly now across the canal. The water sparkles in 1,000 tiny flashes. A pair of swallows dart through the air, chasing invisible insects above the water's surface. They twist and glide effortlessly, their wings cutting quietly through the warm air. Marco watches them for a moment. Birds move through Venice almost as easily as boats. Bridges and rooftops give them endless places to rest. Satisfied with the peaceful view, Marco steps back inside once more. The afternoon work will continue slowly. The gondola will grow stronger, and the quiet craft that has shaped the boats of Venice for centuries will move forward, just as it always has, one calm moment at a time. The afternoon settles gently over Venice. The bright energy of the morning has softened now, and the city moves with a quieter rhythm. Sunlight spreads warmly across the canals, touching the water in slow, shifting patterns. Inside Marco's workshop, the air feels calm and steady. The gondola frame stands beside the canal just as it did earlier, but now a few more pieces of wood have joined its growing shape. Progress in a square is often difficult to notice at first glance. The changes are small. A board fitted here, a joint shaped there. But over many days and weeks, these small steps slowly transform simple pieces of wood into something graceful and strong. Marco stands beside the gondola and studies the work he completed before his break. The larchboard sits perfectly along the side. The seam where it joins the frame is smooth and quiet. He runs his hand along the edge again, feeling the shape, feeling the balance. A gondola builder trusts his hands as much as his eyes, sometimes even more, because hands can sense the smallest changes in the surface of the wood. A tiny rise, a shallow dip, a curve that bends too quickly. Marco nods softly to himself. The board feels good. Satisfied, he turns back toward the tool bench. Several tools rest where he left them earlier. The plane, the chisel, the wooden mallet. Each tool has been used so many times that it almost feels like an extension of his hands. Marco selects a long measuring string. The string is simple, but it helps him check the gentle curve running along the side of the gondola. He stretches the string carefully from the front section of the frame to the rear. Then he steps back and observes. The line must follow the exact shape of the boat. Too tight, and the curve may flatten. Too loose, and the gondola could bend unevenly when placed in water. Marco adjusts the string slightly. Just a small movement. Yes, now the line flows smoothly from one end to the other. He smiles faintly. These quiet moments of checking and measuring are some of Marco's favorite parts of the work. They allow him to pause, to observe, to appreciate the slow growth of the boat. Outside the workshop, the canal carries the calm movement of the afternoon. A narrow boat drifts past, carrying clay pots stacked carefully on its deck. The potter guiding the boat moves slowly, using a short oar to steer between the canal walls. Farther down the waterway, a group of children laugh as they cross a small bridge. Their voices echo gently between the buildings, before fading again into the soft sounds of the city. Marco returns his attention to the gondola. The next piece to shape today is a support beam that will help strengthen the inside of the boat. These inner beams are important. They help the gondola hold its shape as it moves through water day after day. Marco selects a piece of oak from the rack against the wall. Oak is strong and dependable. It has been used in boat building for centuries. He lifts the beam and places it carefully across the workbench. Then he studies it for a moment. Even strong wood must be shaped properly. If the beam presses too hard against the sides of the gondola, it could cause stress over time. If it is too loose, the structure may weaken. Everything must fit together in quiet balance. Marco marks the wood lightly with charcoal. One line, then another. These marks guide the shaping that will follow. He picks up the saw. The blade glints briefly in the afternoon light, and then the slow rhythm begins again. Back and forth, back and forth. The saw moves gently through the wood. Small grains fall softly onto the bench. Marco breathes slowly as he works. There is no rush. The gondola will be ready when it is ready. Outside, a warm breeze drifts along the canal. It carries faint scents of cooking from nearby kitchens. Somewhere, someone is preparing a midday meal. The smell of herbs and simmering vegetables floats through the air. But Marco remains focused on the quiet work before him. The beam slowly takes shape. Once the cut is finished, he sets the saw aside and reaches for the plane. Shh, shh, shh. Thin curls of oak fall away. The surface becomes smoother with every pass. Marco turns the beam and smooths another edge, then another. Soon, the piece begins to match the gentle curve needed inside the gondola. He lifts it and carries it toward the frame. Holding the beam carefully inside the boat, he checks the fit. Almost perfect. Just a little more shaping will be needed. Marco places the beam back on the bench and continues working. Tap, shave, smooth. The slow rhythm of the workshop continues. Outside, the sunlight begins to lean slightly toward the west. The afternoon is quietly passing. In Venice, time does not hurry. It flows gently, just like the water in the canals. And inside the peaceful square, Marco continues, the patient craft that has shaped the gondolas of this city for generations. Piece by piece, curve by curve, day by quiet day, the gondola grows stronger, and the calm work of the builder continues. The afternoon in Venice drifts forward slowly. The sunlight that once shone brightly above the canal has begun to soften. It now falls at a gentle angle across the rooftops and bridges, turning the stone walls a warm shade of honey. Inside the square, the workshop is calm and quiet. Marco stands beside the gondola frame, with the oak support beam resting in his hands. The piece is nearly ready, but he knows from experience that nearly ready is not quite enough. A gondola must fit together like a careful puzzle. Each piece must meet the next one with quiet precision. So Marco returns once again to the workbench. He places the oak beam down and studies the charcoal marks he made earlier. These faint lines guide the shaping of the wood, but they are only a beginning. The real guide is patience. Marco lifts his plane and begins again. Shh, shh, shh. Thin ribbons of oak peel away from the beam, curling softly before falling to the bench. The smell of oak is slightly different from the other woods in the workshop. It is stronger, earthier. It reminds Marco of forests far from Venice, where tall trees grow in quiet hills and valleys. Those forests are where many of the woods used for gondolas begin their long journey. Marco pauses for a moment and runs his hand along the beam. Smooth. He turns it slightly and smooths another edge. Shh, shh, shh. Outside, the canal carries the gentle movement of the afternoon. A narrow delivery boat glides slowly past the workshop. The boatman rows calmly, his oar dipping in and out of the water with steady rhythm. Behind him, the water folds into soft ripples that spread quietly toward the canal walls. The sound of the oar is simple and soothing. Dip, glide, dip, glide. Marco hears it but continues his work. The oak beam is now nearly perfect. He lifts it carefully and carries it back toward the gondola frame. Holding the beam inside the growing skeleton of the boat, he adjusts it slowly. A small push here, a slight turn there. Then the beam settles gently into place. Marco presses down lightly. The wood fits snugly between the sides of the gondola, just as it should. He reaches for the wooden mallet and taps softly. Toc, toc, toc. The sound is warm and steady. The beam settles firmly into its position. Marco smiles quietly. Another small step forward. The gondola is slowly becoming stronger. He secures the beam with wooden pegs rather than metal nails. Gondola. Builders often prefer wooden pegs because they move more naturally with the wood itself. Metal can sometimes create tension as the boat shifts with changes in temperature and moisture. But wood understands wood. It expands and relaxes together. Marco inserts the pegs one by one, tapping them gently with the mallet. Toc, toc, toc. Each peg disappears smoothly into the joint. The beam is now firmly in place. Marco steps back and studies the interior of the boat, the curved ribs and support. Beams now form a quiet pattern inside the gondola's long body. They remind him of the bones of a great fish or the ribs of a wooden arch. Structure hidden beneath the surface. Strength that will never be seen by passengers who sit inside the finished boat. But Marco knows it is there, and that is enough. Outside the workshop, the sounds of Venice continue their calm afternoon rhythm. A group of gondoliers pass along the canal, guiding their boats slowly between the stone walls. Their voices drift softly through the air as they talk to one another. Laughter rises briefly, then fades again. Across the canal, the bakery door opens and closes as customers come and go. The smell of bread appears once more on the afternoon breeze. Marco wipes a little wood dust from his hands and steps outside for a moment. The sun has begun its slow journey downward. The water reflects the sky in long streaks of gold and pale blue. A few clouds drift lazily overhead. Marco leans lightly against the doorframe and watches the canal. He enjoys these small pauses in the day, moments when the tools are silent, and the city moves gently around him. A gondola approaches slowly from around the bend in the canal. The gondolier stands tall at the back, rowing with relaxed confidence. Two passengers sit quietly beneath the curved canopy near the center of the boat. They appear to be visitors, perhaps seeing Venice for the first time. Their eyes move slowly across the buildings and bridges as the gondola glides forward. Marco watches the boat pass. The gondola moves with such quiet grace that it almost seems to float without effort. Moments like this remind Marco why he loves his work. Because every gondola begins as simple wood inside a quiet workshop like his. And one day, that wood becomes something beautiful. Something that moves gently through the canals, carrying people through the heart of the city. Marco steps back inside the scarrow. The afternoon is slowly turning toward evening now. There is still time for a little more work before the light fades. He picks up the plane once more. Soon, the familiar sound fills the workshop again. Shh, shh, shh. Outside, the calm waters of Venice continue to flow beneath the bridges, and inside the peaceful square beside the canal, Marco's quiet craft moves forward, slowly, patiently, one careful piece at a time. The afternoon light in Venice begins to soften even more. The bright gold of earlier hours slowly turns into a gentler glow, spreading quietly across the canals and the old stone walls that rise from the water. Shadows stretch longer now, sliding slowly across bridges and doorways. Inside Marco's sciaro, the workshop feels peaceful. The air is warm but not heavy. The scent of wood shavings and oil lingers softly, mixed with the faint, salty smell drifting in from the nearby lagoon. Marco stands beside the gondola frame again. The new oak beam rests securely inside the boat now, adding strength to the growing structure. The gondola's shape is becoming more complete with every passing hour. Still, Marco knows that a gondola is never rushed. Each stage must settle. Each piece must rest in its place before the next one arrives. He walks slowly around the frame, observing the lines of the boat from different angles. From the front, the gondola appears narrow and graceful. From the side, its long curve flows smoothly like the gentle bend of the canal itself. Marco places his hand along the outer edge. The wood feels warm from the afternoon sun that enters through the workshop door. Warm wood often bends slightly more easily, which can be helpful when shaping certain parts of the boat. Marco steps over to a stack of long boards resting against the wall. These boards will one day form the outer skin of the gondola. He selects one made from fir wood, a lighter wood that is often used for parts of the boat that must remain flexible but strong. The board is long and smooth, but it is still straight, and a gondola is full of curves. Marco carries the board toward a simple wooden stand near the center of the workshop. This stand helps hold boards in place while they are shaped. He places the board carefully across it. Then he pauses for a moment. Shaping a curved plank requires patience. The wood must be persuaded slowly, never forced. Marco picks up a small kettle from the corner of the workshop. Inside the kettle is warm water. He pours some of the water onto a cloth and gently wipes the surface of the board. The moisture helps soften the wood fibers slightly. This makes it easier for the plank to bend gradually. As he works, the quiet sounds of Venice drift inside. The distant murmur of voices. The gentle splash of water against the canal walls. A gull calling somewhere high above the rooftops. Marco begins to bend the plank slowly against the shaping stand. Not quickly, just a small amount. Then he waits. Wood remembers its shape slowly. If pushed too far, it can crack. But if guided gently, it will settle into the curve that the gondola requires. Marco secures the board with 2 wooden braces. The plank now holds a slight bend, only a small one, but it is a beginning. He will leave it like this for some time. Later, he will adjust it again, bending it a little more until it matches the shape of the boat. This slow method has been used in Venice for generations. Some builders use steam to bend wood quickly, but Marco prefers the older way, the quieter way. Outside the square, the canal reflects the afternoon sky like a moving mirror. A small cargo boat drifts past, loaded with baskets of fruit from nearby islands, bright oranges, green figs, and pale yellow lemons. The colors glow warmly in the sunlight. The boatman rows slowly, guiding the heavy load through the narrow waterway. Marco watches for a moment from the doorway. Then he returns to the workshop. The gondola frame waits patiently beside the water. Its curved ribs cast soft shadows across the floor. Marco steps inside the frame carefully. He stands where passengers will one day sit. From here, he can look along the entire length of the boat. The front curves upward gently. The back rises slightly where the gondolier will stand. Marco closes his eyes for a moment. He imagines the finished gondola floating quietly on the canal, the soft sound of the oar, the gentle rocking of water, the quiet conversations of passengers drifting through the evening air. Then he opens his eyes again. For now, the gondola is still unfinished, still growing, still becoming. Marco steps out of the frame and returns to his tools. He picks up a small hand scraper and begins smoothing another section of wood that will soon join the boat. The sound is soft. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The slow rhythm fills the workshop once again. Outside, the sun continues its gentle journey downward. Light begins to fade from the rooftops and gather softly across the water. The afternoon is slowly turning toward evening, and inside the calm square beside the canal, Marco continues his quiet craft. Patient hands, careful tools, wood slowly shaped into something graceful. A gondola in the making. The afternoon slowly leans toward evening. In Venice, the change from day to evening happens gently. The sunlight that once filled the canals begins to soften and stretch into long golden reflections that drift slowly across the water. Inside Marco's squero, the workshop has grown quieter. The tools rest neatly on the workbench. The shaped boards lie patiently where Marco placed them earlier. The gondola frame stands beside the canal, its curved ribs catching the last warm light of the day. Marco moves calmly around the boat. He carries a small wooden bucket filled with fresh water from the canal. The bucket sways gently in his hand as he walks. He sets it beside the gondola and dips a cloth into the water. The cloth darkens as it absorbs the cool liquid. Then Marco begins wiping the inside surfaces of the boat, not because the wood is dirty, but because wood dust gathers slowly during the day's work. Fine particles settle across the boards and joints. Wiping them away keeps the surfaces clean and smooth. The cloth glides softly along the wood. Wipe, turn, wipe again. The gentle motion is quiet and unhurried. Marco enjoys these small tasks. They allow him to look closely at the work he has done, to see how the pieces fit together, to feel the strength of the structure beneath his hands. Outside the workshop, the canal water reflects the sky in deeper shades of amber and blue. A gondola passes slowly. Its long, black shape moves across the glowing water like a shadow. The gondolier rows with easy rhythm. Dip, glide, dip, glide. Two passengers sit quietly in the center of the boat. They speak softly to one another while the city slides past them. Marco pauses for a moment and watches. There is something peaceful about the way gondolas move through Venice. They do not hurry. They do not rush forward. They simply glide, following the calm pathways of water that wind through the city. Marco returns his attention to the boat inside his workshop. He rinses the cloth and continues wiping along the inner beams. The oak support beam he installed earlier now looks clean and smooth. The wood shows its natural patterns clearly in the fading light. Lines of grain flow through the beam like gentle waves. Marco smiles quietly. Every gondola contains many kinds of wood: oak, larch, fir, cherry, walnut. Each piece contributes something different: strength, flexibility, beauty. Together, they form the quiet harmony that makes a gondola glide so smoothly. Marco finishes cleaning the inside of the frame and sets the cloth aside. Then he reaches for a small wooden stool and places it beside the gondola. He sits down slowly. From this seat he can observe the entire boat, the long curve of the side, the gentle rise of the front, the growing structure inside. The gondola is still incomplete. Many steps remain. The outer planks must be added. The seats must be shaped. The curved prow will need careful attention, and eventually the entire boat will be painted the deep black, color that gondolas are known for. But those steps will come later. For now, Marco simply sits quietly and looks at the progress made today. Outside the canal, evening sounds begin to appear. A window opens somewhere above the water. Soft voices drift down. Footsteps cross the stone bridge nearby, and from far across the city, the bells of a church begin their slow evening chime. 1, 2, 3. The sound carries gently through the air. Marco listens. These bells have marked the passing of time in Venice for centuries. Morning, midday, evening. Their rhythm is as familiar to Marco as the sound of his tools. The light outside grows softer. The golden glow fades slowly into pale lavender shadows along the buildings. The water in the canal darkens slightly as the sky begins its quiet change toward dusk. Marco stands again. There is one more small task before he closes the workshop for the day. He walks to the shaping stand where the long fir plank rests. Earlier, he bent the board slightly using braces. Now he checks the curve. The wood has settled nicely. Marco adjusts the braces just a little. The plank bends a little more. Not much, just enough to continue guiding it toward the shape the gondola will require. He secures the braces again. Tomorrow he will adjust it once more. Little by little, the straight plank will learn to follow the gentle curve of the boat. Marco places his hand along the bending wood. It feels smooth, patient, ready for the next step. Outside, the last bright reflections fade from the canal. Evening is approaching. The city of Venice begins to quiet once again. And inside the peaceful square beside the water, Marco prepares to close his workshop for the night. But the gondola remains, resting beside the canal, growing slowly with each passing day, waiting for tomorrow's careful work to continue its quiet transformation. Evening arrives slowly in Venice. The sky above the canals changes its colors with quiet patience. The bright blue of afternoon fades into soft shades of peach and lavender. The last sunlight touches the upper windows of the old buildings, then gradually slips away. Inside Marco's square, the workshop grows calm. The long shadows of the gondola frame stretch across the wooden floor. The tools rest neatly where Marco placed them earlier, their work finished for the day. Marco stands beside the gondola one more time. He has already wiped the surfaces, checked the joints, and adjusted the bending plank on the shaping stand. Now he simply walks around the boat slowly. It is something he does every evening, a quiet habit. He begins at the stern, where the gondolier will one day stand. From here, the boat curves gently forward along its long, narrow body. The wooden ribs form a graceful pattern, each piece placed carefully over the past weeks. Marco runs his hand along the edge. The wood is smooth and slightly warm from the day's sunlight. He moves forward along the side of the gondola, feeling each board and joint as he goes. This final walk around the boat helps him remember where he will begin tomorrow. A small edge that needs smoothing, a plank that will soon be attached, a beam that may need one more careful adjustment. Marco stops near the front of the frame. Here the gondola curves upward slightly, forming the elegant rise that will eventually hold the pharaoh, the metal ornament that shines at the prow. For now, the front remains simple wood, but Marco can already imagine the finished shape. The quiet curve cutting gently through the canal water, the reflections of evening lights dancing along its sides. He smiles softly at the thought. Outside the workshop, the canal has grown quieter. The busy movement of the afternoon has faded. Only an occasional gondola glides through the narrow waterway now. One such boat passes slowly by the open door. Its lantern has already been lit. The small flame glows warmly, reflecting in the dark water beneath it. The gondolier rows with slow, steady strokes. Dip, glide, dip, glide. The lantern sways gently with each movement. Marco watches until the boat disappears around the bend of the canal. Then he turns back to the workshop. Near the wall, a wooden rack holds several boards, waiting for their turn to become part of the gondola. Marco walks toward the rack and straightens a few of the pieces. He likes the workshop to remain tidy. When tools and materials are kept in order, the work of the next day begins more smoothly. He places the plane carefully on its hook. The chisel returns to its place beside the mallet. The measuring string is coiled neatly and set on the bench. Each object rests quietly where it belongs. Now the workshop feels ready for rest. Marco steps outside onto the small wooden platform beside the canal. The air is cooler now. Evening breezes drift slowly through the narrow waterways of the city. Across the canal, several windows glow softly with candlelight. Families are gathering for their evening meals. The faint smell of cooking drifts across the water. Herbs, bread, warm soup. Somewhere nearby, a cat walks carefully along a narrow stone ledge, its tail lifted for balance. It pauses to watch the canal below, then continues quietly along its path. Marco leans lightly against the wooden railing of the platform. He enjoys this moment at the end of each day. The work is finished. The tools are resting, and the city moves gently into the quiet hours of evening. Above him, the first stars begin to appear in the deepening sky. Their reflections shimmer faintly in the slow-moving canal water. The bells of a distant church begin their evening call. 1, 2, 3. The sound spreads softly across the rooftops and bridges. Marco listens until the last echo fades. Then he steps back inside the scarrow. He walks to the large, wooden doors at the front of the workshop and begins closing the shutters. The fading evening light narrows slowly as each shutter swings inward. The gondola frame remains visible in the dim glow of the sky outside. For a moment, Marco stands quietly beside the unfinished boat. Tomorrow he will return. Tomorrow the shaping and fitting will continue. Another beam, another plank, another small step toward the finished gondola. But tonight, the workshop rests. Marco gives the side of the boat a gentle pat, almost like saying goodnight. Then he closes the final shutter. The squarrow grows still. Outside, Venice settles softly into evening. The canals grow calm, the lanterns glow, and the unfinished gondola waits patiently for the quiet work of another day. Night settles slowly over Venice. The sky above the canals has turned a deep shade of blue, almost black, and the last colors of sunset have faded behind the distant lagoon. Lanterns now glow softly along the narrow waterways, their reflections stretching across the water like long golden ribbons. The city is quieter now, not silent but gentle. Inside the closed squarrow, Marco's workshop rests in darkness. The tools sit quietly on their hooks. The workbench holds the faint scent of fresh wood. The unfinished gondola stands beside the canal door, its curved frame barely visible in the dim evening. Light that slips through the cracks in the shutters. Outside, Marco walks slowly along the narrow path beside the canal. His day of work has ended, but the calm rhythm of Venice continues around him. He crosses the small stone bridge near his workshop. The steps of the bridge are worn smooth from many years of footsteps. People have crossed here for generations. Merchants, builders, fishermen, gondoliers. Tonight, the bridge is peaceful. A single lantern hangs from a metal bracket near the top of the arch. Its flame flickers gently, casting soft light across the stones. Marco pauses for a moment at the highest step of the bridge. From here, he can see a longer stretch of the canal. The water moves slowly, barely disturbed. Farther down the canal, a gondola drifts through the night. Its lantern glows warmly, lighting the faces of the passengers sitting quietly inside. Their voices are soft and distant, blending with the gentle splash of the gondolier's oar. Dip, glide, dip, glide. The sound carries easily through the still evening air. Marco watches the gondola until it disappears beneath the shadow of another bridge. Then he continues walking. The streets of Venice are narrow and winding. Some are little more than stone passages between old buildings, while others open into small squares where people gather during the day. At night, these places become quiet again. Marco walks through one of these small squares now. A fountain stands at the center, its water trickling slowly into a shallow basin. The sound is soft and steady. Nearby, two neighbors sit outside their doorway, speaking quietly together. They nod politely as Marco passes. In Venice, many people know one another. The city may seem large to visitors, but to those who live here, the neighborhoods feel like small villages. Marco turns down another narrow street. Above him, laundry lines stretch between buildings, now empty and still in the night air. A cat moves silently along a stone wall, pausing to watch Marco pass before continuing on its quiet journey. Soon, Marco reaches his small home. It stands along a narrow canal not far from the workshop. Like many houses in Venice, its front door opens directly onto the waterway. A small lantern hangs beside the door. Marco lights it and pushes the door open. Inside, the room is simple but comfortable. A wooden table stands near the window. 2 chairs, a small stove, shelves along the wall holding a few dishes and tools. Marco places his coat on a hook and sits down for a moment. The quiet of the evening settles around him. Through the window, he can see the canal again. The lanterns along the water shimmer softly in the gentle ripples. A distant church bell rings once, marking the late hour. Marco pours himself a small cup of water and drinks slowly. The day has been long, but satisfying. The gondola in his workshop has grown stronger. Another beam added, another plank prepared, another small step forward. Building a gondola is never about finishing quickly. It is about steady progress, day after day, week after week. Marco stands and walks to the window. He rests his hands on the wooden frame and looks out at the canal. The water moves quietly beneath the night sky. Somewhere far away, a gondolier sings softly as he rows. The song drifts faintly across the rooftops and canals before fading into the distance. Marco smiles. Tomorrow morning, the workshop will open again. The shutters will swing wide. The tools will return to life, and the slow, careful craft of shaping wood into a gondola will continue. But for now, the night belongs to rest. Marco blows out the lantern beside the table. The room grows dark. Outside, Venice sleeps beside its silent canals, and in the quiet square by the water, the unfinished gondola waits patiently for the gentle work of another day. Morning returns to Venice slowly. The sky begins as a pale gray above the quiet canals, and the first light of dawn spreads gently across the rooftops and narrow bridges. The water moves softly against the stone walls, carrying faint reflections of the waking city. Inside the square, Marco's workshop is still dark, but not for long. Footsteps approach along the narrow path beside the canal. The wooden platform creaks quietly as Marco arrives and unlocks the workshop door. The shutters open one by one. Cool morning air drifts inside. The soft, gray light of dawn fills the space once again, revealing the familiar shapes of tools, boards, and the unfinished gondola resting patiently beside the water. Marco steps inside and pauses. This quiet moment at the start of each day is one of his favorites. The workshop feels calm, unhurried, ready. The gondola stands exactly where he left it the evening before. Its curved frame catches the first faint glow of morning light. Marco walks slowly around the boat. He checks the boards. The beams, the plank that he bent carefully on the shaping stand yesterday. Everything has settled well overnight. The fir plank holds its gentle curve. Marco nods quietly to himself. That is good. He places his small kettle on the charcoal stove and lights the coals with practiced ease. Soon, the soft whisper of warming water fills the still workshop. Outside, Venice begins its quiet morning routine. A fisherman rows slowly past the canal entrance, his boat stacked with nets from the early catch. Two pigeons land on the roof across the water and begin their slow morning. Walk along the tiles. The first church bell of the day rings somewhere far away. 1, 2, 3 soft chimes. Marco pours his morning drink and stands beside the workshop door for a moment. The sky brightens gradually. Sunlight begins touching the tops of the buildings. Soon the canals will fill again with the gentle movement of boats and gondolas. But for now, the city remains peaceful. Marco sets his cup aside and returns to the gondola. The fir plank he prepared yesterday is ready for the next step. He loosens the braces from the shaping stand and lifts the curved board carefully. It bends smoothly in his hands. Wood that once stood straight now follows the gentle arc of the boat. Marco carries it toward the gondola frame. He places one end of the plank along the outer side of the boat. The board rests there quietly as he adjusts its position. A little higher, a little lower. He studies the line of the curve. Then he presses it gently into place. The plank fits beautifully along the side of the gondola, almost as if it always belonged there. Marco reaches for his clamps again. One clamp near the front, another near the center. He tightens them slowly. Creak. The wood settles into its new shape. Marco steps back. The gondola now looks even closer to completion. Each new plank slowly closes the open ribs of the frame. Soon the boat will begin to look whole. Outside, the sunlight grows brighter. A vegetable boat drifts past the canal carrying baskets of green herbs and onions from nearby islands. The boatman raises his hand in greeting as he passes the workshop. Marco returns the gesture with a small nod. Then he turns back to his work. He picks up the plane once more. Shh, shh, shh. Thin curls of wood fall to the floor again. The familiar sound fills the workshop like a quiet morning song. Outside, the city of Venice continues to wake. Boats glide through the canals. Bridges fill slowly with footsteps. The scent of fresh bread begins drifting across the water once again. And inside the peaceful square beside the canal, Marco continues the slow craft he has practiced for many years. Patient hands, careful tools, wood shaped gently into the graceful form of a gondola. Another calm day of work has begun. The morning grows brighter over Venice. Sunlight now spreads across the canals in long, golden streaks, and the quiet calm of dawn slowly gives way to the gentle activity of the day. Boats move steadily through the waterways, and soft voices drift across the bridges. Inside Marco's squareo, the workshop has come fully alive again. The fresh plank he placed earlier now rests along the side of the gondola, held gently by the wooden clamps. Its curve follows the elegant shape of the boat, closing another section of the frame. Marco walks around the gondola slowly, studying the way the new board meets the others. He leans slightly closer. His fingers glide along the seam where the plank touches the frame. Smooth, strong, but still needing a little shaping. He returns to the workbench and lifts a narrow chisel. The metal edge catches the morning light for a moment before he brings it to the wood. Tap, shave, tap, shave. Tiny slivers fall quietly to the floor. Each small adjustment helps the plank settle more naturally against the boat's structure. Marco enjoys this part of the work, the careful fitting, the quiet listening to the wood. Sometimes he taps the surface lightly with the handle of the chisel. Tuck, tuck. The sound tells him how firmly the wood is resting. Outside the workshop door, the canal carries the gentle movement of the day. A gondola glides past slowly. This one carries 3 visitors who sit beneath a curved canopy. Their eyes move from bridge to building as the gondolier guides the boat through the narrow canal. The gondolier stands tall at the stern, rowing with calm confidence. Dip, glide, dip, glide. Marco pauses for a moment and watches the boat pass. Even after many years of building them, he never grows tired of seeing gondolas on the water. Each one has its own small personality. Some move lightly, some sit lower in the water, but all of them share the same long, graceful shape. The shape he is helping create again now. Marco returns to the plank he is fitting. The clamps hold it firmly in place while he smooths the edges. He reaches for the plane. Shh, shh, shh. Thin ribbons of wood curl away and fall softly beside his feet. The sound fills the workshop again. It is the same sound Marco heard as a child when his father worked in this very place. Back then, Marco would sit quietly in the corner of the workshop, watching the steady rhythm of his father's hands. He remembers the way the tools moved, the calm patience, the quiet concentration. At the time, the days seemed long and slow, but now Marco understands. Building something well takes time. Wood cannot be hurried. It must be shaped gradually. Marco stops planing and lifts the plank gently. The board fits beautifully now. He tightens the clamps once more. Creak. The wood presses into its final position. Soon he will secure it permanently with wooden pegs, just like the support beam yesterday. But first he checks the curve of the gondola once again. He stretches the measuring string from the stern to the rising front. The line flows smoothly along the side of the boat. Marco smiles quietly. The gondola's shape remains perfect. Outside, the canal has grown busier as the day continues. A small cargo boat loaded with crates passes slowly by. The boatman calls out greetings to people standing on a nearby dock. Across the canal, the bakery door opens and closes as customers come and go. The warm smell of bread drifts through the workshop again. Marco breathes in slowly. Morning in Venice always carries these gentle scents and sounds. Water, wood, bread, voices. They mix together into the calm rhythm of the city. Marco reaches for the wooden mallet and begins securing the plank. He places the first wooden peg carefully into a drilled hole. Then he taps it gently. Tock, tock, tock. The peg slides deeper until it disappears into the joint. He repeats the process with another peg, then another. Each tap echoes softly through the workshop. The plank is now firmly joined to the gondola frame. Marco steps back. The boat looks stronger now, more complete. The open ribs of the frame are slowly being covered by the smooth outer skin. It will still take many more days of work before the gondola is finished. But today's progress is clear. Marco wipes his hands on a cloth and walks outside for a moment. The sun shines warmly across the canal now. Boats drift past. Pigeons flutter between rooftops. And the gentle life of Venice continues moving along the water. Marco stands quietly in the doorway of his workshop. Behind him, the growing gondola waits patiently. Another small step has been completed, and the calm work of the gondola builder continues, just as it has for generations. The day in Venice moves gently toward afternoon once again. Sunlight rests warmly on the canals, and the water reflects the bright sky in quiet waves of gold and blue. The city feels alive but never hurried, as boats glide slowly beneath the bridges and footsteps, echo softly along the narrow stone streets. Inside Marco's squareo, the workshop holds the calm rhythm of steady work. The newly placed plank now forms part of the gondola's outer shape. Its smooth surface blends with the other boards, gradually closing the open frame that once revealed the ribs inside. Marco stands beside the boat with a small brush in his hand. The brush is dipped in a thin protective oil. He spreads the oil gently along the seam where the plank meets the frame. The wood darkens slightly as the oil soaks in. Lines in the grain appear more clearly now, flowing through the surface like soft rivers beneath the sunlight. Marco works slowly, brushing along each seam and joint. This oil helps protect the wood from moisture and keeps the surface strong as the gondola ages. In Venice, water is everywhere. Boats must be ready for many years of floating, rocking, and gliding through the canals. Marco moves carefully along the side of the boat. Brush. Pause. Brush again. Each stroke is calm and unhurried. Outside the workshop, the canal carries the gentle sounds of the afternoon. A gondola passes with 2 passengers seated quietly beneath its canopy. The gondolier rows with relaxed movements, guiding the boat along the curve of the canal. The oar dips into the water. Dip, glide, dip, glide. Marco listens for a moment as he continues brushing the wood. He enjoys hearing the boats move outside his workshop. It reminds him that every gondola begins here, with careful hands and quiet patience. After finishing the oiling along the plank, Marco sets the brush aside and steps back to observe the boat. The gondola is beginning to look whole now. The curved sides flow smoothly from front to back. The interior beams hold the structure firmly. Only a few sections of the outer boards remain open. Soon those too will be covered. Marco walks slowly around the gondola, studying it from every angle. He pauses near the front. Here, the elegant rise of the prow begins to take shape. This area requires special care. The front of the gondola must cut gently through the water while maintaining its graceful curve. Marco runs his hand along the rising wood. Smooth, strong, balanced. Yes, the shape feels right. Across the canal, the bakery door opens again. A young boy carries a basket of bread outside and places it on a small cart. The smell of warm loaves drifts across the water and into the workshop. Marco breathes in the familiar scent and smiles quietly. It is nearly time for his midday meal again. But first, there is one more small task. He walks to the shaping stand where another plank rests. This plank has been bending slowly since early morning. The wooden braces hold it in a gentle arc. Marco loosens the braces slightly and adjusts the board. It bends just a little more. Not much, just enough to continue teaching the wood its new shape. He secures the braces again. By tomorrow, the plank will be ready to join the boat. Marco wipes a bit of wood dust from the bench and returns to the gondola. For a moment he simply stands there, quietly observing the work of many days. The ribs, the beams, the growing outer skin. Each piece has found its place slowly, patiently, like a puzzle that reveals itself one careful step at a time. Outside, the sunlight sparkles across the canal as boats continue their gentle journeys through the city. Bridges cast soft shadows across the water. Voices drift faintly from the nearby streets. Venice moves at its calm and steady pace. And inside the peaceful square beside the canal, the gondola continues its quiet transformation. Almost ready, almost complete. One more day of work, and the boat will soon be prepared for the water. The afternoon light begins its slow journey toward evening once again. In Venice, the sun does not disappear quickly. Instead, it drifts gently downward behind the rooftops and towers, letting the city rest in long, golden reflections that stretch across the canals. Inside Marco's square, the workshop glows softly in the warm light. The gondola now stands nearly complete beside the water. Its long curved body flows smoothly from stern to prow. The wooden planks that once lay scattered around the workshop have found their place along the boat's graceful sides. Marco walks slowly around the gondola, just as he has done many times before, but today feels a little different. The final plank has been fitted. The seams have been smoothed. The protective oil has soaked quietly into the wood. The structure is strong, balanced, ready. Marco runs his hand gently along the side of the boat. The wood is warm from the afternoon sun, smooth beneath his fingers. Every curve feels familiar now. Every board carries the memory of the quiet hours spent shaping it. He pauses near the front of the gondola where the graceful curve rises upward. Soon the pharaoh, the polished metal ornament of the gondola's prow, will be attached here. It will shine brightly when the boat glides through the canals. But for now, the simple wood already carries its quiet beauty. Marco steps back and studies the boat from across the workshop. The gondola rests partly above the water on wooden supports. Its long, dark shape seems almost alive in the gentle light. Outside the workshop door, the canal moves slowly as always. A gondola passes by, then another. The gondoliers row calmly, guiding their boats between the stone walls and beneath the arching bridges. Marco watches them for a moment. Soon this gondola will join them. It will glide along the same waterways, carry passengers through quiet canals, reflect lantern light during evening rides. But for now, it remains here in the peaceful square-row. Marco picks up a cloth and begins the final gentle polishing of the wood. Slow circular motions bring out the smooth shine of the surface. The grain of the wood flows beautifully beneath the soft glow of sunlight. He moves from the stern to the center of the boat, then toward the rising prow. Polish. Pause. Polish again. The quiet rhythm fills the workshop. Outside, the sounds of Venice continue drifting through the warm afternoon air. A church bell rings softly in the distance. A boatman calls out a greeting to someone across the canal. Water laps quietly against the wooden posts along the edge of the dock. Marco finishes polishing the last section of the gondola and sets the cloth aside. For a long moment, he simply stands there, looking, remembering each day of work, each careful adjustment, each small step that slowly brought the boat to life. Building a gondola is never just about wood. It is about patience, balance, tradition, and the quiet knowledge passed from one generation of craftsmen to the next. Marco's father once stood in this same workshop, his father before him, each shaping wood beside the calm canals of Venice. Marco places his hand lightly against the side of the gondola one last time. The wood feels steady and ready. Outside, the evening light begins to soften. Golden reflections drift slowly across the canal water. Lanterns begin to appear along the bridges and doorways of the city. Soon, the gondola will be lowered gently into the water for the first time. But that moment will come tomorrow. For now, the boat rests peacefully inside the workshop. Marco walks toward the open doorway and steps onto the small wooden platform beside the canal. The air feels cool and calm. A gentle breeze moves across the water. He looks back once more at the quiet workshop and the finished gondola waiting inside. Then he turns toward the canal. The city of Venice continues its slow, timeless rhythm. Boats glide softly through the evening light. Bridges cast long shadows across the water. And somewhere nearby, a gondolier sings quietly as he rows through the winding canals. Marco listens for a moment. Then he smiles softly. Another gondola is ready to join the peaceful life of the city. And tomorrow, the calm work of a gondola builder will begin again.